Hey, well, welcome to Equipping Families Through COVID-19. My name is Ben Freudenburg, and today our topic is building unity in your church. It's my pleasure to introduce Glenn Gritzon, our presenter.
Hey, Ben.
You know, Glenn is the founder of Congregation Family Service. I got that right. Think about that. But you're much more than a founder of this non-for-profit. You're a super researcher. You're a counselor to many, many people. Professor, taught, pastor, and an author. And Glenn, you're one of the people responsible for mentoring from family life. And what a blessing that has gone international all over the world. And besides that, you are one of the main people that put this Combat Trauma Healing Manual together. And that's been a blessing for those coming back serving our nation. And so you've got a lot of experience working with families. And, over the last 20 years plus, Glenn, I've really learned a lot from you. And in fact, just in the last few days, you've recently shared with me. Well, let me quote you, okay? Quote you. You said, "We're now the COVID generation." That's a great thought. We're now the COVID generation. And there's not a day that goes by that you don't think about or express or say the word COVID-19 or the coronavirus. And that you actually know what those two really sinister words mean. And that's thankful to the medical profession, right? And then in April, you said that the Oxford English Dictionary added terms like self-isolate, self-quarantine, flatten the curve, and PPE. All new words for our culture, the world's culture, really. And then you said that between March 12th and June 5th, TV and radio stations have aired National Association of Broadcasters produced spots, more than 630,000 of these spots at an estimated value of over $133 million. And every media outlet has saturated their programming with this COVID messaging. And I don't know about you, but I think I've heard all of them, right?
Agreed.
But then you started talking about the trauma of COVID-19. Now that's something I had never thought about, this crisis causing trauma in people's life. And you compared it to war trauma. And then you said, because of the different perceptions of this COVID-19 crisis, this could cause disharmony or disunity among church members or even our homes as we begin recollecting in faith and life communities or with our families. And then here was the hooker, okay? You said, what has emerged as the most frequent messaging has been, we're all in this together. And then you asked me the question. In one way that is right, but Ben, have we all experienced COVID-19 in the same way? So with that question in mind, I'd like you to help us start getting our arms around the personal trauma of COVID-19 as we start the next chapter of our church and coming back together in faith and life. Could you help us do that?
Ben, thanks for the kind words and a great way of kind of allowing our listeners to kind of catch up on some of the conversations we've had over the last several weeks. I want to start this by saying words matter. And I want to do this from a standpoint of where I think we need to understand two words up front: crisis, and crisis equals consequences. By that, I mean a crisis is a circumstance in which a person needs to respond and in which he or she believes their response may have life-shaking consequences.
So are you saying that not everyone even thinks of COVID-19 as a crisis?
No, and let me give you an example. This morning, I was taking a call, finishing up heard my wife go outside to water the tomatoes. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a little break, go out to see her. I get to the doorway and I see this swarm of hornets in the front yard. And they're between the house steps and there, and she had just passed through there a few moments before. My immediate thought was, okay, this is a threat. And I knew exactly what they were. And I began to see them actually forming their nest, this view of 5,000 hornets right there. I got over to my wife and I brought her back over and I showed her, and I kind of made sure that I was between them and her so that she could work her way back in. And I'm turning back into the house and I look back and we're aware of the threat. And I see a mom, a 4-year-old, and a child in a stroller going within 15 feet of that nest, unaware, unoblivious. To us, it was a crisis. To her, it could potentially be a crisis and possibly a trauma. That's the difference that we have to look at.
Yeah, I get it. I'm with you. As I've interacted with people, everybody has this different view, a little different, not all the same view. What causes that?
Well, one of the things that we found years ago is we spent so much time looking at this crisis, grief, trauma continuum, was there's 3 elements. The first is the crisis situation itself. The second is the individual in the crisis. And the third is the response made to the crisis. Now, every one of these has with it the source, the ability to create disunity. And so considering that there's 3 elements working, not just one, is the first way for us to begin to understand this.
So what you're saying is because we view and respond to COVID-19 differently, this could fuel disunity in the church. Is that right?
Oh goodness, Ben. And I want to spend a little time maybe helping you and our listeners grasp this a little bit more. I'm going to start with this. As you think of your experience so far in 2020, and this is for our listeners too, how much do you believe you've been impacted by the pandemic? And for fun, I want you to raise your hand when I'm going to read 5 options. And when I get to one that you say, okay, I think I can relate, just raise your hand. Those of you who are in a group watching this together, this is going to be interesting. I wish I was there to watch your faces as you did this. So here we go. I'm going to give you the list of 5. Nothing happened. Well, something happened, but something happened and I'm angry about it. Something happened and it cost me a lot. Something happened and I've overcome it. Now, Ben, I saw where you raised your hand.
Yeah, and I could see the people raising their hand on the screen.
You could?
Almost equally divided.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And your experience is correct. Your response is correct. And everyone who chose the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, here's the message, is also correct. This isn't zero sum. It's not binary. It's not one experience. It's a continuum that we have to understand as pastors and church leaders. People are entering at one point, they're overcoming at another point, and they're somewhere in the journey and they're never there.
So let me get this right. In light of these 5 different perceptions or the way we've experienced COVID-19, some of us are going to say didn't really exist. Some of the people are going to say, something happened but didn't affect me. It wasn't that bad. Others of us are going to say something happened and I'm starting to kind of feel angry about how it affected me. And then others are going to say something happened and I had a loss. I lost my job. My grandma died and I wasn't able to be there, and so forth and so on. And then some of us are saying, oh, I've been wounded by all these things, but now I'm beginning to get over it. I'm beginning to find some resolution.
Yeah.
So if all those different people are going to come into our churches, what's a pastor to do to prevent the disunity as we come back to community of faith?
If our listeners do nothing more today than this thing, I want you to write down 4 words. Unity is not uniformity. I think
Say that again.
Unity is not uniformity. None of us have gone through the whole of events from the same starting point as the same person with the same response that we've had toward it. And so as a result, I think we have to come back and return to a principle that was part of pastoring, a part of soul care from our heritage, is that we need to follow the biblical construct of mindfulness that guides ministry, not just family ministry, but all ministry, and especially during times like this. Mindfulness can be best thought of as in the increasingly lost art of being fully present in the moment, with all of our attention in either one direction or on one person. In other words, we are listening, we're focused on what is going on, we're trying to do risk management, we're trying to identify the threat, we're trying to identify what resources we have in order to engage it.
In other words, we're trying to put down our busyness.
Oh gosh, yes.
Relax and listen.
Well, think about it. Over the past however many months since March 13th is when our churches basically may have met the last time all in the building together. Your staff, yourself, your teams have probably made more phone calls, more texts, more emails. You have gone out of your way in your online messaging. If anyone is dealing with struggles, please contact the church. You've probably tried to do all these kinds of things, but then you have to ask yourself, how do people respond? You know, how did we do when we got that opportunity? Yet we have to remember that loss, and in this case, crisis, is recognizing that there were both quantitative and qualitative differences in the experience of COVID and all the side effects we're going to talk about a little bit later. So if you think about it, for those who would maybe said nothing happened or something happened, but imagine the disunity you could quickly create if you were to go ahead and validate, well, I kind of agree, nothing happened, so let's just go on and act like nothing occurred. I just want my old life back and let's just go do it. At that moment, you would have invalidated everyone who experienced the loss and said something did happen and something has since followed what occurred. You know, you basically walked into a tripwire. Boom, you know, you suddenly have taken a large component of your congregation and you have sparked the fuel on the floor, disunity. Now reverse it. If you go ahead and say something has happened and you dwell specifically that everyone has to have had the same experience. But for those who haven't yet experienced it, you just backed into another tripwire and boom, there you go. We all have in ministry have dealt with difficult people. Well, we're also now dealing with difficult people in difficult times.
Yeah, so
those tripwires, we gotta avoid them.
Yeah, and so as a church worker, our job is to avoid the tripwires of thinking that everybody experienced COVID-19 similarly. And so how do you do that?
Well, the only path is to acknowledge all 5 experiences. The best way when there is distress is going, you know, hey, I want to tell you, I get it. Some of you have experienced this, some of you experienced this, some of you experienced this, some of you, and here's the important words. And it doesn't matter what I experienced as your pastor or as a church leader. I am more concerned about what you experienced so I can come alongside you in hopes to walk through this. And we can talk about this later in terms of God's faithfulness at some point down the road.
So, okay, so as we're coming back to church and we're experiencing life together again, we're going to be at these different stages. And you talked to me about some are going to have wounds and some are going to have scars. Okay, talk about that a little bit.
Well, kind of the difference that comes in this is that the first 2 categories that I talked about, where nothing happened, or nothing serious, those people are not going to have great wounds. And so the first responders don't have to run after them. But for those who said something happened and I'm angry about it, let me share a little truth with that. I have found as a counselor that you cannot be both angry and self-blaming at the same time. So you're either going to see the sins I have committed, or you're going to see the sins that have been committed against me. You're never going to see the battle of the heavenlies. You're going to be in one of those modes or the other, and you're probably going to flip-flop back and forth in that process. That is a situation that produces helplessness. Living in a state of crisis over an extended period of time is what moves it from crisis to trauma. Now, for someone who said something happened and it cost me a lot, the inability to grieve. We did a internment a week ago, and it was a group of 10 of us in 4 cars who could not even, the wife was distraught because she couldn't have that last chance to touch the coffin, as it was a military funeral, as it was kind of taken. And we kind of look at all that, and we start to look at the loss for those who've experienced this. How cavalier would it be to say that nothing happened? Get over it. That's nothing. There's nothing going on around us. Somebody's heart is torn out, and they're beginning to doubt God's presence, his guidance to us, his character, his moral law. I mean, talk about the spiritual warfare that's taking place in that life, and somebody else is going, it don't really mean anything. That's the dilemma. That's the source of potential disunity. Now, listen to this part though, Ben. To the person who said something happened and I've overcome it, here's what they're really saying. I now have a scar. I no longer have an open wound. Tomorrow, I got a call today, one of those calls today. I'm having some surgery coming up. And guess what I have to do? I'm going to be getting 2 COVID tests. One, the nasal swab to find out if I have or don't have the virus. And second, I'm going to get the IgG blood test to find out if I have antibodies. Now, on the one hand, it's measuring if I am in crisis. The other is if I've overcome. You see the principle?
Yeah, I really do.
I've overcome, I have new usefulness that I might have. Ways that I never imagined that I could be used by God.
Yeah.
And that's the aspect of family ministry, I think, that we sometimes forget, that those that we invest in their times of struggle later come alongside of us in places that we don't have the background, the understanding, or in some people's minds, the right to speak.
Yeah, just to give you an idea, Christy from Hazard has said we might be in the storm together, but we're not in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
Scott,
some are 100-foot yachts and some are just little rowboats.
Chris Buckman said, not a question, just a little light bulb. We're all in this together, but we're not coming out together. We had this different experience.
That's a good observation. That's a great observation.
And what I hear you saying is that that as pastors and church workers, we need to keep our eyes open and recognize wounds turn to scars. And it's really a sign of hope. And I believe that's a great point. The conversation changes. The response is different than, oh, I'm wounded, versus, oh, look, they're getting better. And that's a great point. Now, Glenn has posted on equipfamilies.com website 4 free articles that will help you and your church support families through this COVID-19 and beyond. The link is posted in the Q&A box, or you can just go to it. And if you have a question, you can surely write a question in the box, and we'll try to answer it. So, as you think about households coming back together, getting into the new normal, same risk of disunity apply to the homes, our homes as pastors, the homes that we serve. And would it be a different experience based on the type of home that you come from?
Well, let me start answering that, Ben, by returning to crisis equals circumstance. The risk is to think everyone experienced the same crisis, or if the same crisis experienced it in the same way, but that's not a reasonable thing to do. You have to remember that crisis changes our self-awareness and other awareness greatly. And one of the core truths is that 2 households have not experienced the same. We have gone out of our way since we moved here to kind of reach out across the yard lines and to know our neighbors. And there's not a single home within the 10 or 12 houses that we've engaged through this time that's had the same experience? Not a one. And so to assume that, we would be setting ourselves up for the potential of another tripwire. Now, Ben, say the old days, I'm coming over to visit you. I get into town and going, hey, I'm by Baskin Robbins. You want me to pick up some ice cream? The first words out of your mouth are going to go, well, go inside and see what flavors they have, right? Well, our households are kind of like the flavors. They're all ice cream. But because of all these other factors, there's a different essence to them. There's different personhoods that have made up their home, and they're assembled in different combinations. And one of the things that we know, just like flavors of ice cream, is everybody has their preference. So here's a quick list: nuclear families, couple families, single parent families, step families, single adult families, grown-up nuclear families, multi-generational families, unrelated roommates, and everything that didn't fit into one of the categories that I just quoted.
Hey, Todd, you know, a friend Scott has asked a question. He's a pastor, and he said, I understand that we all experience this COVID-19 differently. And being a pastor, I feel like I have two churches, one online, and now we're going to come back one in person. Can you give me any ideas how to increase unity, considering I'm working now with two different groups and with that they all come at this experience differently?
Oh, Scott, you have asked the probably $1 million question. It is going to be a challenge because most churches I've talked with have had an increased involvement through their online platforms. Many people who church life was not a part of their world kind of, again, re-engaged with churches in the neighborhood or community. Their neighbors might have invited them or whatever. And thinking that you have two churches is kind of like the thought that you're living in two countries. I am second generation American. English is not my first language. I learned to speak several other languages before I learned English. And guess what I discovered? I had to speak all of them. And it was on my best part to convey and communicate to people of all ages in as many ways as possible the same messages and truth. And not to elevate one over the other, not allow our sense that, you know, those who are not coming back and kind of being in our presence are somehow less than those who are watching us from a distance. In Proverbs, you know, one of my favorite passages that I use in counseling is guard our hearts. And this, as pastors, we kind of have to guard our hearts, and we need to know our flocks. We need to know our herds. Don't ask somebody to do something before they're ready. At the same time, don't overpraise those who are bold and taking risks, because none of us know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Todd, another friend, says, I've seen pastors and church leaders taking a lot of flack for decisions they're making through this crisis. How can my family serve the Lord and grow in support of these wounded leaders? Oh,
another wonderful question. It's sad that we have to ask it, but here is the way we have to approach it. We have to take it upon ourselves to say, you know, God has given me a greater understanding of his presence, his protection and provision, his peace. I'm going to go out of my way to demonstrate it to everyone I possibly can. And one of the best ways is to simply acknowledge that they're in the anger stage. They're upset that their life has been changed. They don't know how to deal with it. And yet, if you think about it, if we create so much disunity and take sides, we're never going to get that chance to just hang out. My greatest approach, the lesson I was taught almost 50 years ago in this, was when you're never sure what to do in a situation, when in doubt, just hang out. Find some way to be in each other's presence. And eventually you begin to talk about where they are at. Ask them what their experience has been. Our biggest risk is to be absorbed in talking about what we've experienced because we haven't processed it yet with anybody. And so we've got to guard our heart against our desire to do that, because we've been in this too. We haven't been excluded. But at the same time, we have to realize that the criticism comes when there's a perception that we're not understanding, we're not listening, we're not, in a sense, acknowledging and demonstrating mindfulness of what they went through and what they're going through and how they're wrestling with God, and that it's okay to wrestle with God.
So here's another question for you, Glenn. He says, we're opening Sunday school and trying to balance all the feelings as we come together to open safely. Even around masks, some believe you must wear them. Some of them don't think we should wear them. Some think masks are useless, not needed at all. How do we balance all these feelings as the pastor? What should a pastor do?
Again, I'm not Solomon, and I can't cut this child in, or threaten to cut this child in two to do that. That would be the most disunifying thing we could do. I think what we need to do is acknowledge. You touched on something. Let me share with this. From counselors I've worked with, and especially many who counsel in the church, the top 5 complaints people have had. I've lost my motivation completely. I'm sick of my partner's bad mood and irritability. The kids are driving me nuts. I'm way beyond e-learning. I still can't sleep. And then guess what? The top one was, do I really need to wear a mask? And so the question that's being raised, acknowledge you're in it with many other people. In that, we share a unity. We don't know. I will tell you there's some side effects that if you're aware of these, you might be able to figure out your answer to this question a little bit better. Here are 9 known side effects that we've seen so far. Suicides are up, anger problems are up, fear and anxiety are up, medication use is up, marital issues are in the increase, family divisiveness and discord is up, church cyber attendance is increased, and trust in government and authority is decreased. So we are in good company. We are looking at all of the microclimate elements of COVID that not only can be crisis, but become trauma for some. And so as a pastor, you stand alongside your staff and you kind of put your arm around the shoulder and go, I get it. This is tough. Yeah. Christians shoot their wounded. That's a phrase that I learned years ago. And you have to say, it's okay. Just be a shepherd. Try to know your flock. Try to know your herds. Engage them, acknowledge the stress that they're experiencing, and remind them that God is still present.
And, the pastor has 3 fronts to really think about.
Oh, yeah.
At the front of the church, and then their own home, and then the homes of those they serve. And Glenn, you've done a great job in trying to help us begin thinking about how to care for each other and not become the cause of disunity in the church. So could you give us one nugget you want pastors and church workers to leave with today about preventing disunity in the church?
Well, I would not presuppose to be that bright about this. So how about if I just rely on the Apostle Paul? In 1 Thessalonians 5:14, this is what he wrote. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, which we know to be the disorderly or the undisciplined. Encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak. And here's the part none of us like, be patient with them all. If there was one piece I could leave you with, be patient with yourself. Lower the expectations. It's one of the articles that I talked about. It's a principle I wrote specifically for pastors. But in doing this, we need to be patient with ourselves because we don't know what to do. We need to be patient with others. They don't know what to do. More importantly, at home, we need to be patient with our own families, the first family. And more importantly, we need to create space for conversations. And so that when in doubt, just hang out and just kind of find that moment to quietly talk about what each is experiencing and just convey to them the promise of God's presence, his provision and protection, and his peace, even in stuff like this.
Yeah, just reminding people what Jesus has done for us is such a heartwarming and peace-giving thought that God loves us so much that he wants us to make it through, and he will be with us as we go through it. So I just want to remind you again that Glenn has put 4 different articles up on equipfamilies.net, equipfamilies.net, for you to help your congregations really take a deeper look at these issues and for you to support them. And I want to thank Glenn for taking time to be with us. And for those that are listening, thanks for being here. Stay safe, share the gospel, save lives. God bless you all. Again, thanks a lot, Glenn.
You're so welcome. Blessings to you all. Bye-bye. Now, Ben, if